Did any of you follow what I was doing up there? Did any of you follow the slides that were coming up? Didn't even look at it. Okay? Did you think, what is that guy doing?
I thought you were looking for a shirt.
You thought I was looking
Yeah,
for one?
I did.
What I did was, I just ran through all the high-pointed slides of this presentation. And I did it in the way in which many of our online courses present information. We take a bunch of slides, we stick them up there, and say, have at it, learn. Was that very effective?
No.
Not at all. Most of you didn't even know what it was. You weren't paying attention. Even if this had been an online course, do you think that had you seen this as an item in the course, that you'd have paid much attention to it? And if you had paid any attention to it, would you have gleaned any information from that? Probably not. What I want to talk about today is integrating and enhancing online education, but not just from the context of online education in a vacuum, but how can we use online components to enhance the overall educational environment? I'm going to talk a little bit about where we've been, kind of how we got to where we are now, and where maybe we can go in the future. This is going to be, the focus of this presentation is on narrated digital presentations. Many of you may refer to them as narrated PowerPoint. But I call them narrated digital presentations because they incorporate more than just PowerPoint. And I want us to try to wrap our head around a little bit this notion that we can use these tools either in an online setting that's completely online for distance education, or as an online component that can actually enhance what we refer to as traditional education. It's more of a comprehensive approach. The impetus behind me developing this topic was about a year ago. I was approached by a colleague, and they asked me to write a book chapter about narrated PowerPoint. I talked to the editor of the book, and when they told me what they wanted me to write about, my response was, I don't know much about that. And you know what their response was? Yeah, but by the time you finish writing this chapter, you're going to know a lot about it. I said, well, thanks. This past year has been quite an adventure for me, and Steve didn't pay me to say this, but I have to tell you that the ITC, the Information Technology Center here, was invaluable for me in this venture. Because, as I said, I didn't know much about it. So I said, okay, what are my resources? And as I got out there and started looking, trying to figure out what in the world I'm going to write about, well, the logical place is to look at the literature that's out there. Guess what? There's not any. So I'm like, okay, by the time I finish researching this, I'm going to know a lot about it. I don't know where I'm going to get that information, but he keeps telling me I'm going to know a lot about it. So I had to go find some things. What I did find in the literature, and I use that term very loosely, was some step-by-step instructions that usually amounted to doing a Google search and throwing narrated PowerPoint out there, and you get about a page and a half of step-by-step, click here, point here, do this. And it's either in the form of informational material or instructional material from the software provider, or it's on a blog somewhere. Some guy that sits around and what I call a techie, because I don't mean any disrespect to that, but I'm talking about folks that do this a lot more than I do. And they can tell you all the bells and whistles of all the software applications that are out there. I'm a real simple guy. I don't know all that stuff. But these are folks that sit around and talk about this all day long. And it's like, this one works great, this one doesn't work so well, I like what this one did. That was really about it. Even in what I call scholarly literature, academic literature, the only references that I found to anything about narrated presentations was some anecdotal comments such as, yeah, that's pretty neat, or yeah, I like that, it was pretty cool. Well, that really didn't help me write a chapter very well. It didn't help me understand the benefits that we can derive from these tools. So I started looking to see if we had any studies out there that have been conducted. And what we find when we talk about narrated PowerPoint, traditionally the anecdotal information that I was able to find indicated that these are used primarily in a completely online environment, or at least that's what the little bit of literature reflected. I'm sure they're used other places, but this is where I found some references. But the crux of those studies was more along the lines of, is online education or traditional instruction better? This interminable online versus face-to-face debate, which I'm sure most of us know is at the ultimate stalemate, and it's been done to death. But while there are several studies out there that talk about online education versus traditional instruction, they look at it primarily as an either-or situation. And even at that, they don't talk about what are best practices in the field. What are the best educational practices, whether it's an online setting, a traditional setting, or a hybrid setting. They don't talk about that. So that got me to wondering, are we really asking the right questions about some of these tools that are out there? When I looked at these studies, and admittedly a couple of these studies were my own, and I looked at the suggestions for future research. Many of them said we needed to look at best digital educational practices, including my own. I did one of those beat the dead horse to death online versus traditional studies, and I found the same thing, no significant difference. And one of my recommendations in that study was that we look at specific components of the online environment and determine which way works best. If the two educational delivery methods have no difference, maybe there's some things that we can look at within those methods that can tell us where we really need to go. Yes?
So you're talking about the outcomes, there's no difference, right? When they
Correct.
assess
Correct. Learning
online,
achievement.
learning person, the same.
Right.
Okay, just
Right.
okay.
There's a lot of qualitative information out there that talks about the differences of perceptions and convenience and all these other factors. But if you look at simply academic achievement, there's really no difference in the majority of the studies.
My research shows it's the same. So.
Right. Okay. But I began to ponder this from a different perspective. And I think the appropriate question, or the more appropriate question, is what are the best educational practices overall within the context of a digital age? Not just digital education, but what are the best educational practices that we can use to reach the larger number of students, get them the information they need in the context of today's world, because that's what we're really after. Education is supposed to help people function within their society. And if we can get that and use all the tools that are out there for a comprehensive educational approach, then this just becomes one more resource we have in our tool belt. This begs the question of, why do we do this? Or, okay, we found this over here, so what? What does it mean? And what this boils down to is, how do we meet the needs of today's students or today's learner? Are we giving them what they're going to need to succeed once they leave our educational environment? Along these lines, we need to understand what is effective education and what are some components that can help educational practices be more effective. We certainly need, and many of these you'll recognize from these traditional online versus traditional debates. Why do we have online education? Why is our online services growing at such a vast rate, or a rapid rate? And you'll often hear things touted such as convenience and accessibility from remote locations and all these other factors. Meeting the needs of the non-traditional learner who has other obligations. They have to work full-time, they have family, they have all these things that prevent them from coming to the traditional classroom. Well, that's great in that environment, but don't those things really apply in the overall educational setting? We're seeing a tremendous influx of what we used to classify as non-traditional learners coming into the undergraduate classroom, even in our day classes on campus. We're seeing a generational shift of what we would still term as a traditional student, those students coming straight out of high school into higher education. But they are much more technologically savvy. They have a greater exposure to the world around them outside the classroom than many of us had. So we need to look at how do we meet the needs of our learners? What makes our education effective? Convenience and availability. Well, that's the old online argument. But doesn't it also apply in the traditional classroom? The bottom line is, if we can't get our students to come to class, if we can't get them to access the material, then our education is going to fall short of what we're hoping for. How many of you have had students that have bought textbooks that you require in your classes, and you base your lectures and classroom discussions on material in that textbook? You don't regurgitate the textbook, but you expect them to know that information there so they come to class equipped to actively engage in discussions. Only to find that either they don't read, or as evidenced by non-participation in class, or they even keep the plastic wrapper on the textbook so that they can take it back to the bookstore and get the most money for it during buyback time. I've been there. It makes me want to jump up and down and scream and run off into the woods, screaming and pulling my hair out, the couple that I have left. So we've got to do something to get these students to access this information that they're going to need to enhance their educational experience. We've got to have something that's convenient for them, because they're not going to pull themselves up by their bootstrap like we had to do and read just because they're supposed to. They're going to have to like it. It's going to have to be convenient. It's going to have to be available. We need to do that within the context of their social role. We need to understand that today's students have so many things going on that this old adage of you need to spend 3 hours outside of class studying for every hour you spend in class, are they going to do that? At least not in the way that we perceive study. There's ways to get them the information, but not by giving them a textbook and say, go home and read. It's not going to happen. We also have to look at both of those components as far as how all of the things we do in the classroom impacts their willingness to participate. Now, we can certainly look at willingness to participate as far as whether or not they're even enrolled in courses. But the reality is that many of these students, they come to college because they're supposed to come to college. They really don't want to be here. Even though they're here, they don't want to come to class. If they don't come to class, they're not going to get the material. They come to college for a social partying experience. That's really about it, but they're not willing to get up in the mornings and come to class. So we need to find something to make the classroom engaging. Certainly all of these factors impact the online environment, but they also impact the traditional classroom environment. And these are some contexts we need to have if we're going to make our education effective. Having these things in mind, we can better understand kind of the evolution of online education. I remember early on when I started teaching online, and I had faculty mentors that told me, oh, you need to do online. It's the easiest thing in the world. All you got to do is take your class and just stick it up online. And you can sit back and you can go to Disney World and you can teach your class from Disney World, because all you got to do is answer email. If they ask you a question, the rest of it's up there. They can just read it and you're good to go. I call those the bundlers and the stickers. They bundle up their classroom presentation, and they stick it online. But what are they putting up there? Not much. Traditional online transition, or the traditional transition to online education by many of our faculty and many of our educators involves about 3 steps. They take it and they take all their stuff and they put it online. And they think that they can take the same thing they do in the classroom, put it online, and they've got an effective product. Well, what are they putting online? Their notes, maybe, and they make people read. And that's about it. They put it out online. They never have any contact with their students, so they're putting this stuff out there, and then the second component is they hope they can sift through it and get something out of it. And really, all those 2 things do is give us a situation where we're doing that third thing. And all that third thing is self-education. These students that we have put in the traditional transitional online course really could probably get more out of the course if they just went and bought the book and read it than what they're getting from us. And we're getting paid the same amount of money to teach online as we teach in the classroom. We have, instead of this much effort in, we have about this much effort we put into it because we don't have to prepare a lecture every day. And many of us are going to get paid more money. Here at this university, we get paid developmental fees to put courses online. Well, I mean, you talk about something that ought to be illegal. All we do is take our notes and stick them up online, and we get paid all these vast sums of money for developing an online course. What a joke. But that's what we did. Now, was it really our fault? I don't think it was. Certainly, we got some people that will take advantage of it. But I really think the problem is that we as educators didn't know how to transition ourselves to the online course. We were doing the best we could. We didn't really know what was out there for us. But this is the result. These courses, when they were put online, involved about 4 things. Extensive reading. We put all this material up there. The textbook. Read chapter 1, 2, 3, and 4 by next Friday. And if they spend that time reading, then that makes up for the time they would have been in class listening to me. They got the same investment as my in-class students. Well, people don't like to read as much as we might like to think they like to read. So we put all this reading up there. We may even, now what's really neat, oh, isn't this cool? We can find a journal article and we can put it up online to go with the book. And then they can read that too. That's not really that effective. We'll have some asynchronous chats. We'll post a discussion board question and tell them to make 2 postings during the next week about what they think of that, and it must be at least 3 sentences. Woo, that's in depth. Papers, papers, and more papers. We want them to write. They're going to have to express to us what they've learned in a writing format. I even read, back to some of this literature that's out there, I read a synopsis of transitioning to the online class in which the author stated that the primary difference between online and traditional courses was that the online course, by necessity, must incorporate much more reading and writing. And that online facilitators need to be aware of that necessity. Now, my question is, remember back in grade school when you got caught talking? What was the punishment?
Right.
You had to copy a page out of the encyclopedia. You had to write 150 times, "I will not talk in class."
Silence is golden.
Right. You write, silence is golden. Even in high school, how many of us liked doing our term paper in high school? Most of us, it was this thing that we knew was out there for our senior year. You dreaded it just like going to the dentist to get a root canal. The whole time through high school. And then when we finally got there, it was like, oh my gosh, just hit me with a stick. We have conditioned ourselves, and we still condition our students in pre-higher education to despise writing. And yet we base an entire educational delivery system on the thing that most people hate. How effective are we going to be? Now, admittedly, we all probably need to learn to write better. And some writing is good for us. We certainly need to do that. And some of us actually enjoy it, but most people don't. And if you tell somebody they've got to write paper after paper after paper, and their whole class for 15 weeks of a semester is going to be reading and writing, they're just going to get nauseous. It's horrible. But here, the fourth thing, this is where we really started to shine. We started putting our PowerPoints up online. Boy, isn't that cool? This is where we could really show that we were engaging the class. Because we didn't just have writing assignments, but we had these PowerPoint presentations up there. But the reality is, what was the measure of how good or how effective we were being in the classroom, in the online classroom? If my PowerPoint had more stuff in it than yours, or I had some animation in mine, but you didn't. You know, if I had that kind of stuff, I was jammed up, wasn't I? Most of our PowerPoints look like this. This is how we judge them. They got a lot of color in them, a lot of flash. You know, the more colorful we can make them, the better. You know, when the evolving Office products started coming out with more and more backgrounds, and then you can even go online and get extra back downloads for your PowerPoint design. You know, that was just great. You know, I remember Fireball. Y'all remember Fireball? When Fireball background came out, that was the coolest. It looked like a multicolored comet coming across the screen. That was just the coolest thing. Or this is what we do. Here's a PowerPoint slide. The goal of many or most educational institutions that deliver online courses often seems to be to try to make the online class as good as its traditional counterpart. Indeed, I find that my greatest strength in the traditional classroom is the ability to relate various examples of practical application through the use of dialogue and discussion, in essence, verbally. And I have struggled to find ways to incorporate this component into my online courses. Students can glean only so much information from books and slides projected onto a screen. It is the anecdotal information provided by the facilitator, the real-world examples that bring the material to life. Otherwise, learners might just as well enroll in a self-directed correspondence course. Oh my God, if I had to read a whole presentation full of that stuff, now, that's what we're talking about in here. But do we really, and this is not just best online PowerPoints, this is like PowerPoint 101. I know we've all fallen into this trap. Hopefully we've learned from our experiences. We don't put all this stuff on a PowerPoint slide. We make very quick, sharp statements. And we talk about these things, and we fill in the anecdotal information. We give examples. The PowerPoint is a very brief outline when it's used properly. But we think that we can do all this stuff online, and we put all this material into PowerPoint slides. You know, hopefully that's not the way our real classroom PowerPoint looks. But even if it is, even if it's not, we tend to want to do this when we put it online so we can get more information into this flashy PowerPoint presentation for our online student. That's horrible. But that's what we do. Well, there's a new wave of transition. And as part of my new wave of transition, when I started figuring out how horrible we were doing it, I posted a picture of myself online. Now today, you know, we're laughing about that, and today I think most everybody would say, well, of course you do that. But you know, there was a time when we didn't do that. There was a time when this was innovative right here. And I'm like, man, look at me, I'm cool. I put a picture of myself out there. And not only is it a picture of me, but it's a casual picture of me. I'm not this stuffy professor behind the coat and the tie. I've got on a t-shirt. And I'm smiling at them. They can relate to me now because they've got a face to go with this stuff that's on the machine. Wow, what a personal flair. But this was big stuff. We now also have evolved beyond that, and we're using things such as Wimbo voice tools. Now, there are other tools out there. Wimbo's the one that I use. It's the one that we have at the university here. But this is really cool. We can add voice to our discussion boards, to our emails, to our announcements, and we can even do podcasts through Wimbo. What's the benefit of putting voice with it? We have the face. Now we can actually hear somebody. I mean, the reality is they don't know if that's me or not. You know, hopefully they'll trust me and know that it's me, and there's really a person out there, and it's not just a canned presentation. But now we can actually have voice. Right, yeah.
You can also look like it, say that you were talking, but the student could be flipping through their book at the same time and not looking at the screen.
Exactly, exactly. And isn't that what they do in class anyway? Several benefits to it. Rather than a posting where we say, okay, at least a 3-sentence posting twice this week, you can say a lot more in 3 minutes if you're talking than you can in 3 minutes of typing. I hate to type. You know, I typed my entire dissertation with 4 fingers. You know, it's horrible. But I did it. That's why it took me so long. And I only had half my fingers to use. So I'm very abbreviated in my typing. But I can talk all day long. What other benefit do you get from talking and hearing audio? How much do you lose?
Think.
What's that?
You can think.
You can think.
It's hard to think while you're reading because you're concentrating on the words and trying to interpret that in your mind.
Exactly, exactly. But can we also derive a lot from voice inflection? I can emphasize things through my voice. You know, appropriate pauses, elevating my tone, that sarcasm that can't be conveyed or are very difficult to convey in writing. Similarly, students can do the same thing. If I require my students to talk to me, I can often pick up on areas where they're having problems because I can hear uncertainty in their voices many times. And it helps to guide me as an instructor to get them help where they need help. So this is a great tool. I also started doing podcasts. Now, we can certainly create our own podcast knowing that it strictly is going to be a podcast. What I did was I recorded my traditional face-to-face classes. And this worked well for me because all of the courses that I teach online, I also teach in a face-to-face setting. So what I did was record those class sessions. They get my entire lecture. They have the benefit of hearing questions from students, my responses to questions from students, and how the class is interacting. Now, I've had some colleagues that have said, well, but the students are online or not in a live setting, so they can't ask the questions themselves. But my experience has been that most students usually have the same issues. If you look at class to class to class, iteration after iteration after iteration, semester after semester, don't most of your students have problems in the same areas or with the same issues the majority of the time? Don't they have trouble grasping the similar concepts that their previous counterparts have had trouble grasping? That's been my experience. That's also my experience in the online setting. So even though these students are not getting to ask me questions live, they very often have the same questions and they're hearing the responses to them. So it's a valuable resource for them. Now, the big benefit of podcasts is, remember what I said about meeting students where they live? How many students do you have that don't have an iPod? Not many. So students are not going to sit at home and read a book, but they can be out and about doing things, and they can download your lecture, your class session on their iPod and study while they're doing it. While they're out running, while they're working out. They can listen to your lecture in your class. That has pros and cons, but it is a potential resource for you. As I started doing podcasts, I noticed several things. Number one, I got fewer questions from my students. My questions were being answered before they were asked. This was really great for me because we all know that the perception of teaching online is that it takes less time, but the reality is it takes more time. You've got to really spend a lot of time to prepare a quality course. Time is not only a valuable thing for students, it's very valuable to me too. So if I'm inundated with 100 emails asking questions about material on the course, that cuts into my time. And I'm greedy, I don't want to do that. That reduced that greatly because questions were already being answered. Even when they had questions, oftentimes the podcast material will answer those questions before they're asked, and there's a much, if they had to email me a question, it may be 2 or 3 days before I get a response back to them. But if they hear the answer almost as soon as the question occurs in their mind, much better retention because there's a shorter time lapse between the question and the answer. So that's a benefit. I noticed improved test scores. Test scores were coming up. Now, this could simply be because they're getting more information, but I at least like to think that they're engaging the information better. And it's a repetition. We know that there's greater learning with repetition. So this is another way to reinforce concepts that are previously presented. And there were more articulate responses in discussion boards, papers that were written. I said, we hate to write, but you still got to do some papers. But my papers were more articulate. My discussion board responses were more articulate. So these were some benefits that I noticed. From the perspective of the students, it was very positive. I got responses like, wow, this is the coolest thing I've ever seen. Never had a professor that gave us such a resource that fits my lifestyle. As Steve Holt says, my coolness factor went way up. Now, do I really care about being cool with my students? No. But how does that relate to what we're doing? The cooler I am, the more willing they are to participate. The more willing they are to participate, the greater their educational experience. That's where the coolness thing comes in. It fits their schedules and it fits their needs. They can take the class with them anywhere they go. But there were some negatives. They quickly realized that there was a disconnect. Many of them were taking online courses for convenience. Remember, convenience and accessibility? Well, if they not only have to do the online stuff in addition to listen to hour-long class lectures, that becomes very time-consuming. Even to the extent that my online students were finding themselves spending more time in class than my face-to-face students. So very quickly, that cool factor started to wear off. And what I noticed every semester was that at the beginning of the semester, my podcasts were being accessed greatly. But by the middle of the semester, almost not at all. They just ran out of time. So while I had this great resource, it wasn't being utilized the way I hoped it would be. This is where I found the greatest benefit to narrated presentations. And to me, it represents a bridge between the extremes of that non-interactive, non-verbal online course and having them have to do too much work and spend all this time in class when we're trying, in many cases, to be accessible and convenient for them. Narrative PowerPoint does several things. It provides details and anecdotal information. Remember when I flashed the slides up when y'all weren't paying attention? If I go back through those and show those to you, all you're getting are the bulleted statements that really aren't going to have a lot of meaning to you, unless you have the information to go along with them. The supporting information, the anecdotal information, the real life stories or applications about what we're talking about. It also allows you to reduce or compress your class time. If I record a class session and I put it up in a podcast, that's a 50 or an hour and 50 minute or an hour and 15 minute lecture they've got to listen to. I can take that and compress it into about a 20-minute narrated presentation. I can do that because I'm hitting the points, as I'm going through my slide presentation, I'm hitting the points, I'm in an uninterrupted environment because I'm sitting in my office. I don't entertain at that point questions and discussions from students. I don't have to worry about the technology going down or something happened or something that extends class time. I have a controlled setting, and I can effectively reduce an hour-long session to about 20 minutes. And the research shows us that that's really about the attention span at any given time. Even in an hour-long class setting, the greatest attention is about the first 15 or 20 minutes. It wanes, and then it comes back around 10 minutes before you get ready to leave. So now, hopefully, we're back to where y'all are listening to me. Okay? It's also very easily accessible to students. This is not something they have to go and download. This is something that you can put directly in your course, and they can click on a link and it automatically opens it. And it's just right there in its place. You can give them the link, you can email it to them, and they can get it that way. But it's very accessible to students. They don't have to have any special software on their computer. It'll just open and play. So it's really pretty neat. This is what I noticed. Yes?
I'll press you in a moment about it, but tell me what tool you used to do this with.
Adobe Presenter and Camtasia. We'll talk about that in just a minute.
You're going to do that. Okay, great.
Here are the benefits I noticed. The access to my podcast didn't wane. I would tell my students at the beginning of the semester, look, I'm presenting this information to you in this presentation. If you want more detailed discussion, here's another resource for you. And what I found was that not only did my access to podcasts not wane, it actually increased. My students were having their curiosity piqued and going out and looking on their own for additional information. It was amazing to me. I couldn't believe they were doing that. So now we went from a situation where students didn't want to get the podcast because it took too much time to a situation where students are actually voluntarily and on their own spending more time in class than their traditional counterparts. That was amazing to me. Their reading increased. Now, I had no way to track this. This is just simply self-report information from students. But they did indicate to me in their writings and in their discussions that they had at least read the textbook because they referred to stuff in it. But they also, I have several students who have indicated to me that they have looked for additional sources outside the material that I provide to them. So I think that's a tremendous asset. They provide more critical analyses, both in papers and in discussion boards. I often can't get them to shut up. I set a 3-minute time limit on my voice discussion boards. I have students that now not only fill up 3 minutes, but they come back with a second and a third and a fourth installment of that 3-minute session. They don't get all they want to say in that 3 minutes, so they come back and do another posting. My papers are much more articulate, and they include references to the material in the podcast, which is another validation. You know, I can check and see how many times they've been accessed, but this is another validation that they're actually using that material. And so I'm seeing a greater synthesis of all the material that I provide. This is providing a tremendous springboard for an overall educational environment. I've also found some benefits for traditional learners. This is a great mechanism, because it is easily accessible, this is a great mechanism for giving in-class students review material or study material for their exams. I had previously told them they could access the podcast to do that, and they did it some, but they really didn't do it a lot because they spend an hour in class and they'll spend another hour listening to it. They don't want to do that. But as they're going back and reviewing for exams, you've got 20-minute sections in there. They can go back and review that very easily. They also can do this if they miss class. It's a great review tool for when they're missing class. They can get the benefit of it. And although you can create podcasts that have video incorporated in them, mine are just audio. So this gives another component to that. You're hitting the visual and the audio. So it's a great comprehensive tool for that. This is what you're talking about?
Well, yeah, what do they?
Okay. There's a myriad of things you can do and ways you can create and narrate a PowerPoint. And I'm not a techie. Josh can help you with this. And no disrespect to the techie term, but he knows this stuff a lot better than I do. I've used him on many occasions. I know about this much about it, but I know enough to be functional, so it works out really well. And that's the beauty of it. Even somebody dumb as me can figure out how to do this. All you have to do, and great thing about this university is, this is provided for us. The university has the license in place for Adobe Presenter, and that can be given to any faculty member. And once it happens, it's so simple. This is the toolbar for PowerPoint. The only thing that happens when you download this, you'll see the Adobe Presenter tab that gets added to your toolbar. So you click on it. You need to have a microphone. Best thing I found is a headset. You click on it. You get your PowerPoint presentation ready to go, and then you click record. And when you do that, you just start talking. This is the window that you'll see. It'll come up, and you'll notice, I don't know if you can see this, this says slide 4 of 9. So this presentation will have 9 slides in it, and this is slide number 4. With Adobe Presenter, you can record each slide individually, which for me, being not that technologically savvy, was great, because the software I'm going to show you in just a second kind of overwhelmed me. It's better in many applications, but it was a little bit above my level. This was great because I'm doing one slide at a time. And all I do is click on the red button, start talking, and when I finish talking, I click the next button. And I can go back and I can review if I have a vapor lock and I can't think of something to say and I don't like the way it sounds, I can record back over it. I can edit it, and then I just move on to the next slide. Very manageable for me. The other, and probably, these are probably the 2 most popular software applications that are out there. The other is Camtasia. And Camtasia can be used to record PowerPoint presentations, just as Adobe Presenter, but it does it, rather than doing it one slide at a time, it does it as a, what's the term, is it a streaming video that it creates? It's basically a movie that it makes, and you talk all the way through it, and you cycle through the slides as you're talking. For me, that became very overwhelming because I had to think too far ahead. With Adobe Presenter, I can do, if I've got some time and have an interruption in my office, I can do it and I can cut it off and I can come back and pick up where I left off. This was harder for me to do that with. I'm sure there's a way to do that, but it just didn't work as well for me. The beauty of Camtasia is it does other things, more advanced applications, better probably than Adobe. You can put video clips in here. You can do video in Adobe also, but this is probably a little more friendly for that. You can do on-screen capture of the computer screen. You can highlight your cursor as you move around and explain what you're doing on the computer. There's all types of things you can do in here, and admittedly, I'm not really up on Camtasia. It's something I want to learn, but it is a tremendous resource for you. So, but these are very simple applications. Does anybody have any questions or any comments? I know I went through a lot of material pretty quickly, but I really wanted to get out there that this is not a how-to in narrated presentations. This is more of a why we ought to do it and how it can really help our educational experience and us providing education to those people out there that are really seeking it. And sometimes even folks that don't know that they're seeking it, but they know they're supposed to do it. So that's really kind of what I wanted to present to you. Do y'all have any questions?
Let me challenge you, Dr. Donavant. And you mentioned earlier, and I applaud you for the work you've done. I wish more faculty were headed down the path that you're headed. In my role at the university, I spend a lot of time trying to help move faculty that way, and we have an advanced learning center that tries to move faculty down this path. And I applaud you for the work that you've done, and it's good stuff. But let me take it a next step further and see what you think about this. So you mentioned a difference between your online learning environment and the in-class. You still do both. What if they were the same? And I
What do
say
you
that,
mean, what they were saying?
what if they were the same environment for your in-class folks as well as your online? And let's take the in-class people for a minute. What if all of the stuff that you traditionally do, the lecturing part, the presentation part, what if that was all bundled up? I want to use a podcast, but bundled up some way, and you use the in-classroom time for other stuff, engaged discussion, some deep thoughts about certain items that you're particularly interested in.
That'd be great. That would be great. That would be
Is that the
absolutely
next,
fantastic.
do you think that's the next transition?
That is actually the next thing that I've been looking at, and I've had discussions with folks, other folks that are bringing up exactly the same point that you're talking about. Why can't we get our information that we got to give them? Why can't we get that out there ahead of time and have them come to class with that information already in here, and then we can take it to the next level and do more in-depth analysis, and we can get into more critical discussions of things. That's a tremendous tool, and I think that's a great way for us to go. Unfortunately, I think that's going to be more of a paradigm creep than a paradigm shift, because we deal traditionally with undergraduate students, 13th grade, if you will. It is so tough to get them there. I think if we can kind of show them the benefits of it without them realizing that we're actually teaching them something, we might get them there. They tend to be resistant to that. But yes, I think that is the next transitional phase that we're going to start seeing, or at least I hope it is.
I just was, you were talking about the convenience of the online class and then all that. So basically, to keep that, you just reduce that material into a 20-minute session. Is that, how to keep the online students?
I really think that has been, and I think there's a lot of things, because it includes both the audio and the visual component. And I think that appeals to a broader group. But I think really that's probably the one thing that has the biggest impact is I can get it to them in a manageable time frame that they're not going to resist greatly. And it also coincides with the research we see that says that 20 minutes is about our peak attention span. Yes?
There's a student that kind of was taught on PowerPoint slides, and they would just bring up PowerPoint slides with paragraphs on it, and they would just read it off. The only reason I would ever listen to them is if they made us take a quiz or test on that, and I had to actually take something from that. It would be the only way I ever would have even read any PowerPoint slides.
And how long did you retain that information after the quiz? Not very long.
As soon as it was out of my
As
head.
soon as you had transferred it from here through your pen to the paper, it never came back. It was just gone, right?
And one of the classes I had, she taught that way, and then the students had to get PowerPoint presentations. That was the entire class. We had to get 3 15-minute to a 20-minute PowerPoint presentation during the semester. And I would say probably 85 or 90% of the students, they would just have paragraphs. And when you got to the end of the PowerPoint presentation, you were supposed to ask them questions, and they wouldn't even have a clue how to answer any questions.
When I see stuff like that, it reminds me of my children when they were in like this tall, and they would go, "No, that's what I want to do." Like, no, that's not how we do this. Stop it. But we see it all the time. We really do.
I just think if you were to do the podcast with the narrative PowerPoint, that you should make them watch it, and then when they come to class, have discussion on it, and at the end of the class, always have a quiz. But the only way you can answer the questions in the quiz is if you listen to the discussion well, or you listen
Right.
to the
Which is exactly what you were talking about. Yeah.
Otherwise, they're not going to.
Repetitive reinforcement.
Right.
All that.
Right, and I want us to understand too that I'm not saying that narrated presentations are the be all and the end all.
Right.
I think they do provide that transition within the components, but I think it also is just re-emphasizing things. The more ways that you hear something, the better your chance that you're going to learn it. So I think that comes into play also.
Well, there's a lot of people learn differently.
Exactly.
You got great
So it
people
just gives
now
us
learn-
another tool. Right.
What I also think is fascinating, just a couple of years ago, we were having faculty say, well, I can't do this because they won't come to class. Well, they're adult learners. But this discussion doesn't really happen much anymore. Do you hear that? That faculty saying that they won't come to
We
class?
hear that I hear that argument all the time, but
They're the
it's
last
like- it's-
few
it's-
clinging on to the
Yeah.
branch, you know?
Yeah.
I don't really hear it much.
The dinosaurs are gone too, so, you know, I think we'll evolve away from that, I hope someday. I know you gotta do a drawing, or you'll need to do
Well,
it?
I got one more.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we
I know
got,
my
we just
son-
got lunch after.
Oh,
this.
okay.
My son just started this semester and he's been talking and people he knew in college before him and some of his classmates. They're telling, kids are telling each other, don't buy the books. I mean, we've spent $500 and you don't use them, through whatever means they are. He said, you know, wait till you go to class and see if they're actually gonna use the books or they're not gonna get the material.
And I think that's a concern, and that's what, you know, I've had students come to me and say, you asked questions on the test that you didn't talk, that you didn't talk about in class. I said, I sure didn't. They were in the book. I said, if I'm gonna just regurgitate the book, either you don't need me or you don't need the book. So, you know, I try to make my courses where there's material in the book that they need to know, but I'm gonna expand upon that and talk about things that are not in the book. I'm gonna take those concepts and expand upon them. And there's also a lot of rudimentary information in the book that I don't need to spend class time talking about. They can read that. So I try to blend my courses, but I know some professors don't do that.
It's very interesting hearing your perspective of all this. I'm an IT tech, so it's always interesting to me to hear the faculty and, you know, the experiences that you have with all these different types of things.
Well, I've never been this, I haven't always been this insightful. When I was in my doctoral program, I was probably the last holdout, or at least one of the most staunch holdouts against online education. I hated it, I didn't want to do it, but once they made me do it, said, you're gonna have to learn this stuff, so here you go. I loved it, and it really does meet a need that we're seeing more and more in education.
All right, thank you, Brian.